Hello everyone, welcome to another video of French philosophers. Today we're going to be looking at Michael Foucault. I don't think a lot of you have heard about this man. He was a famous French philosopher born in 1926 and he passed away in 1984. We're going to be looking into him, his legacy in French philosophy, his impacts as a social theorist, and what kind of changes he made to modern society. Let's get right started. So Michael Foucault was a French philosopher. He was a historian and social theorist who worked fundamentally to reshape our understanding of power, knowledge, and societal structures. And unlike traditional philosophers who viewed power as something possessed by individuals or individual institutions, Foucault argued that power is diffused throughout society, operating in very subtle but very pervasive ways through language, through knowledge, and through societal norms. And so he challenged the nature that they traditionally knew of power, authority, and human behavior, and his theories just challenged conventional notions of authority, of truth, and of human behavior, and just leaves a lasting impact even to today of disciplines such as political science, sociology, psychology, and gender studies. And one of his most famous ideas was the idea of disciplinary power, of by-power, and panopticism, which remained influential in today's society as well. He was very much influenced by the historical transformation that followed the World War I too. So if we look, by the time he was in his 20s, the World War II had started, and it would have a lasting impact throughout his career. In this era, there was an increasing skepticism towards the Enlightenment ideals that we looked at last week with Rousseau, and there was more ideals of progress, of reason, and more absolute truths. And so he emerged as a central figure in post-structuralism, a movement that questioned universal truth and highlighted the constructed nature of reality. His studies delved into how institutions such as prisons, schools, and hospitals do not merely serve practical functions, but also operate as mechanisms of control, and it's something that shapes individual into self-regulating subjects. And his ideas just have a significant impact after the World War II, even to today's world. And through his analysis of power, knowledge, and societal control, Foucault provides a new lens through which to examine modern life. His key concepts that we have mentioned continue to influence contemporary discussions of governance, identity, and resistance. Okay, let's look at the first book that he gave us. The first book is one of his most influential works, called Discipline and Punish, The Evolution of Power and Surveillance. And this book is a very famous book that examines how society approaches punishment and it has transformed over time. He contrasts pre-modern forms of punishment, such as public executions and physical tortures, with modern methods of control, particularly in prison, in surveillance, and normalization. And his most famous idea is the concept of a panopticon, and it is a prison that is proposed by Jeremy Bentham, in which a central watchtower allows a single guard to observe all the prisoners without them even knowing whether they are being watched at any given moment. And Foucault uses this as a metaphor for modern society, which is just striking and beautiful, where individuals internalize discipline because they feel they are under constant observation. And in his famous line, he has stated, visibility is a trap. This is a very well-known line that means that awareness of being observed is enough to make individuals regulate their own behavior even when no direct force is applied. This is how modern power functions, not through brute force, but through self-discipline, through normalization, and categorization. This is very, very beautifully written. If we look at, for example, this is a very, very cautious idea that I raised, but even when we look at Nazi Germany, for example, a lot of the power behind brute force during the Holocaust, it was massive killing, massive physical destruction, but also in the steps towards genocide. I believe it is a 10-step towards genocide that we learn about in high school. It's one of the first steps is classification. and then it is symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, and organization, and polarization. And even until stage 7, which is preparation, then persecution, then extermination, we have this whole stage in which society kind of changes the conception of how we view certain groups. And so it is not, modern power isn't really about brute force, but it is primarily before that about normalization and categorization. And so Foucault argues that while traditional societies really relied on physical punishments like public executions, modern societies are now using disciplinary mechanisms like schools, hospitals, and workplaces to enforce norms and create obedient individuals. In this process, what he calls a disciplinary power subtly changes individuals through surveillance, classification, and institutional expectation. So a bit different from what I just talked about during the Holocaust, but in a sense more brutal because it is so blended within our ordinary life. And so Foucault analysis of power in discipline and punish have profound implications, shaping contemporary debates on prison reform, surveillance technologies, and institutional control. His work influenced criminology, political science, and even the study of modern technology, where surveillance capitalism has become a dominant force in shaping human behavior. Our second book is The History of Sexuality, written in 1976. And Foucault here challenges the idea that modern society represses sexuality. Instead, he argued that society does not simply silence discussions on sex, but rather creates discourse around it, regulating it in very complex ways. And so one of the ideas that he raises here is he critiques the common assumptions that pre-modern societies were more open about sex, and that modern societies, particularly in the Victorian era, imposed strict sexual repressions. He argues that in reality, modern institutions like medicine, psychology, and law did not repress sex, but instead classified, analyzed, and regulated it. For example, discussions about sexuality is in psychiatric institutions, legal courts, and religious settings did not silence sexual discourse, but rather created new ways to control and categorize this desire. And a central concept here is called bi-power. I believe it is in one of these slides, but bi-power, and it refers to the state's regulation of human bodies, of reproduction, and health. This form of power operates through medical institutions, demographic studies, and public health policies and legal regulation, shaping how individuals experience and understand their own bodies. Foucault famously noted the 18th century, which discovered the liberties, also invented the disciplines. This really highlights his argument that even as society expanded, individual freedoms such as democracy and human rights, it at the same time simultaneously created new ways to regulate and discipline individuals, particularly when it regards sexuality. And so, even despite the societal liberties that shifted to better societies in terms of revolutionary openings in a lot of ideals, it still has a profound organization of certain behaviors. And this book has a significant, profound influence on a lot of different theories, including feminist, queer, and post-colonial theories. His ideas helped reframe discussions on gender and sexuality, showing how these identities are not purely natural or biological, but are being shaped through historical and cultural power structures. And he has influence on a lot of numerous scholars across various disciplines, particularly in gender studies, political philosophy, and sociology. One of the most famous influential figures that we see was Judith Butler, and his theories impact on her work on gender performativity, arguing that gender is not an innate identity, but rather a set of actions reaffirmed by social norms. And I think this is an idea that a lot of you might resonate with. It's the idea that instead of a set biological gender, it's a regulation of the bodies, a normalization of behaviors, and marginalization of others that is negatively impacting society. Another influence was Giorgio Agamben. I am butchering that pronunciation. I'm very sorry. But he built on Foucault's idea of biopower. I'm very sorry. Um, biopower, particularly in its exploration of the state of exception, where governments suspended normal laws to exert control over life itself, a concept that has now been applied to contemporary issues like surveillance and authoritarian rules. Yeah, so Foucault's work has been crucial in legal studies, influencing discussions on criminal justice reforms, prison abolitions, and surveillance laws. It has lasting impacts on a variety of ranging topics from philosophy to political science, sociology to gender studies, and his analysis of different ideas of power, knowledge, and identity has an impact to the current society and how intellectuals nowadays are viewing these different ideas. Yeah, so I think one of the most significant ideas was his shift from a classical power to a more disciplinary power. The idea of a very intense philosophical transformation where from World War II, people began to think of grand narratives of progress, democracy, and rational governance that was the hallmark of Enlightenment. Foucault kind of positioned himself within this critical discourse, but said that power is not simply through laws of coercion, but embedded into everyday social practices and institutions. And in contrast to classical philosophers who saw power as something wielded by a sovereign or a governing body, Foucault argued that modern power operates in a different knowledge system, but also in productive ways as well. It creates categories, disciplines behaviors, and shape individuals' identities in ways they often do not recognize. Yeah, and so through his most influential ideas, particularly in Discipline and Punish and the History of Sexuality, he explored how institutions regulate individuals through subtle forms of control. And I think this has a lasting legacy, and a lasting and resounding message to us nowadays. How are institutions these days regulating our behaviors, regulating individuals' liberty through subtle and very slight nudges that control us, and to have a fundamentally thorough liberty, we should definitely look into these different ideas, have a understanding beyond the traditional idea of power that we are normally familiar with. And although these ideas are very different from previous authors that we read about, I think looking at these different ideas, thinking about what you personally resound with, and how you would look into these is something that helps you to grow as a philosopher and a thinker. Yeah, thank you so much for watching this video with me. I pray that I hope that you enjoyed this video, that it has sparked interest into a bit about of Foucault and his enduring legacy in today's world, and that you continue to learn and stay curious. Thank you so much for watching, and bye-bye.